In this video, we're going to be talking about markets and competition. So let's try to define what a market is. Okay, so a market is a group of buyers and sellers of a particular good or service. Okay, and you can imagine that the buyers determine demand and the sellers determine supply. Okay, so the buyers determine demand. Right? If you are the one purchasing in the marketplace or you're the one buying, and you're a buyer and you would determine the demand for a product or a service, or for a good or a service. And similarly, sellers would determine the supply. When we're talking about macroeconomics, we are talking about all of those buyers and all of those sellers that exist in the market. Okay, so let's think about some markets that might be very organized and some that might be less organized. So highly organized markets are ones where agricultural commodities are sold, for example. And the ones that are less organized could be one where, let's say, ice creams are sold. Okay, so here the idea is, when we're thinking about a highly organized market, such as the market for agricultural commodities, in these types of markets, buyers and sellers meet at a specific time and place, and then there's an auction that helps set prices and arrange sales. Okay, similarly in Japan, if you want to think about a highly organized market, the market for fish, there's an auction that takes place. It's all at one place in Tokyo, and it's really a great thing to do and go and watch and how that takes place. One of the things that tourists really do when they go to Japan. Okay, so it's very, very organized and everyone's coming together at the same place. All the buyers and sellers are meeting at a specific time and place. Okay, and then there's an auction. But if you think about markets that are less organized, this could be a market for ice cream, for example. Okay, so if you think about San Francisco, you have Mitchell's, you have Buy-Right, and buyers of ice cream do not meet together at one time, and the sellers of ice cream are situated in different locations across the city. Okay, but they offer somewhat different products, and there's no auction going on where someone is calling out the price of ice cream and someone's bidding. Okay, each seller would post a price for an ice cream, and each buyer would decide how much ice cream they want to buy. Okay, so these consumers and producers of ice cream, even though they're operating in these different locations, are very closely connected. Okay, the ice cream buyers are choosing from the various ice cream sellers to satisfy their preferences, and the ice cream sellers are trying to appeal to the same ice cream buyers to make their businesses successful. Okay, so even though it doesn't seem like it's very organized, the group of ice cream buyers and sellers still forms a market. Okay, now I want to talk about this picture right here, which is of the Grand Bazaar. The Grand Bazaar in Istanbul, in Turkey. I went there back in 2011, and it is one of the most beautiful marketplaces that I've ever seen. In Istanbul, this is one of the largest and oldest covered markets in the world. It has over 60 streets, and between 4,000 and 5,000 shops. Okay, and it attracts pretty much about around 500,000 customers daily. Okay, and it's listed as one of the most famous places that tourists visit in a given year. Okay, so the Grand Bazaar is regarded as one of the first shopping malls of the world. Now, when you enter, there are all these beautiful things, right? There's you can see these bowls, these goods that are made by artisans. Okay, and if you walk, inside the market, you'll see that many different stores are selling much of the same thing. Okay, so when you enter, you don't want to buy from that first shop right there, but you want to sort of get an idea of what the prices are like. There's no fixed price. You can haggle with these shopkeepers, and that's the fun of visiting the Grand Bazaar. Okay, so this tells you that, if there are 4,000 shops in the Grand Bazaar, let's write this down. If there's like 4,000 to 5,000 shops in the Grand Bazaar, there obviously is a lot of competition. Okay, and because these stores are competing for or are trying to appeal to these buyers who are walking by, these tourists that are walking by, each buyer knows that when you walk in, there are several sellers from which to choose, and each seller is aware that his or her product is similar to what is offered by many other sellers. Okay, so as a result, what happens is that the price and quantity of these products that are sold are not determined by any single buyer or seller. Rather, the price and quantity are determined by all buyers and all sellers as they interact in this Grand Bazaar. Okay, so let's turn to some jargon now, since we understand this example. Okay, economists typically use the term competitive markets. Competitive markets to describe a market where there are many buyers and many sellers. That each buyer or seller has a negligible impact on the market price, or the price at which the good would be sold. Okay. So if you think about it, in the Grand Bazaar, the sellers have limited control over the price because other sellers are offering similar products, and a seller has little reason to charge less than the going price. And if they charge more, then buyers would just make their purchases elsewhere. Similarly, no single buyer of these products in the Grand Bazaar can influence the price of these products, because each buyer purchases only a small amount. Okay, there's 500,000 customers that are coming by. So in this chapter, what we are going to assume is that we are operating in perfectly competitive markets. And by perfectly competitive markets, we mean that we are talking about the highest form of competition. So this is the highest form of competition that exists, and this type of a market has two types of characteristics. So let's talk about those. The first characteristic is that the goods offered for sale are all exactly the same. Your sale doesn't mean discount. Sale means when you're selling something. Okay. And second, that the buyers and sellers are so numerous that no single buyer or seller has influence over the market price. So, because buyers and sellers in perfectly competitive markets must accept the price that the market determines, they are said to be price takers. Okay, so this is a term that's often used. All buyers and all sellers in a perfectly competitive market act as price takers because they cannot influence the market price. Okay. At the market price, buyers can buy all that they want, and sellers can sell all that they want. Okay. Now notice the difference between a competitive market and a perfectly competitive market. Okay. The goods offered for sale in a perfectly competitive market are all exactly the same. Okay, now we don't really see this in a place like the Grand Bazaar. We might see products that are similar to each other, okay, but not exactly the same. Okay, so the Grand Bazaar is a nice example of a competitive market. Okay, but a perfectly competitive market could be one like the wheat market, for instance. Okay, so example, the market for wheat, where thousands of farmers who sell wheat and millions of consumers who use wheat and wheat products interact. And because no single buyer or seller can influence the price of wheat, each takes the price of wheat as given. Okay. Now remember that not all goods and services are sold in perfectly competitive markets or competitive markets. Some markets have only one seller, and this seller sets the price. So when we have one seller, you know that this is a situation where we have a monopoly, and the seller is called a monopolist. And this could be, an example could be like the cable companies, okay, that operate, like one cable company operates in one zip code, right? So that is an example. But for the purposes of this chapter, we are going to assume that we are operating in perfectly competitive markets.